Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to welcome you to the Best Papers Session 2. I am Dr. Toni Hawkins-Scribner from Air University and a member of the Simulation Subcommittee. I will be the chair of this session, and our deputy is Dr. Wendy Johnson, a member of the Training Subcommittee from Headquarters Air Education and Training Command. We thank you for attending the session. Just a few items before we start our three-paper presentations. As a courtesy for our presenters, please turn off or silence your cell phones. And that's probably tablets too from the last session I was in. Each paper will have 20 minutes for the presentation, followed by 5 minutes of Q&A. If there's anything that extends beyond that, please, you could go out in the hallway and enjoy an extended conversation with the authors. If you need to leave before the presentation is over, please exit through the door that you came through. Please, no flash photography or video recording during the presentation. Feel free to take non-obtrusive photos during the session as well as share on social media. Reminder, all conference registrants are eligible to obtain CEU credits for all paper presentations this year. So please ensure that you are scanned into the session. Our first paper is Contextualizing Cyberspace, Electromagnetic Activities in Multi-Domain Operations Through Playbooks. Our first presenter is Dr. Jacob Cox. He is a solutions architect for Tridem Corporation and an adjunct professor in the School of Computer and Cyber Sciences at Augusta University. Our second presenter is Dr. Chad Bates, who is an Army War College, sorry, I'm Air Force. M&S officer with over 16 years of experience in intelligence and cyber modeling and simulation domains. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to present Drs. Cox and Bates.
Obviously, this is Air Force.
I'm telling you, it's not happy.
Went to sleep yet.
I think it went to sleep. Yes. If you could bring up theirs, theirs is the very first one.
Smelling salt.
Thank you.
There you go. Okay, we've all been there. You get a challenge, dilemma, a problem, and you're like, what's the next steps? Where do I go? Most of us would go jump on our favorite search engine, type in something, they talk to a subject matter expert. Or for those that are really bold, you'll jump on social media and those tiers of experts on that platform. But this is what we did for this presentation. Because you're jumping on those systems, you're trying to find a guide, a pathway, or how do I go, even a step-by-step process to go from unknown to known. And this is what we did. We created a playbook. And you can tell, hey, I'm Colonel Bates and Dr. Cox down there. I mean, this is what we move forward to of trying to bridge those gaps. So what's the problem? So I teach at the U.S. Army War College. And if you don't know what the war colleges are within their professional military education system, I get officers who have like 17 plus years of experience. And historically looking at those group of officers, They've been in a counterinsurgency fight their whole careers. They've been in Iraq and Afghanistan. And now we have changed what we're doing and looking at peers and pacing adversaries of China and Russia and other adversaries. So the thing is, now we're looking at large-scale combat operations, totally different capabilities, totally different areas. So how do we help those officers look at that new battle? Because we also teach at the war colleges that armies love to fight the last battle. So how do we switch their brains, or how do we give them a guide to look at these new battlefields that are coming, since we have nothing to really look at? So as you said, when you go look on social media or anything else, you're looking for subject matter experts. Since 2017, through the Army Modeling Simulation Office, I've been running the Cyber EW Modeling and Simulation Work Group. And up here on the screen is everybody that has participated. Usually it's over, we've had up to 50 different organizations participate in this, and we're finding out what are the gaps, what are the problems, how do we look at this problem set? And I was like, well, how do I tell students, or how do I tell commanders and staff how to do it? Because cyber, electronic warfare, information operations, information warfare, a lot of people look at that and say, that's a buzzword. I don't know what it means. I have a lot of general officers saying, Chad, I need more cyber. It's like, what do you mean, sir? And it's like, how do I communicate, or how do we communicate with those commanders and staff of how do we move forward? Or what is the common vernacular or verbiages we're utilizing? So we took these subject matter experts. We pulled from them exactly how do we move forward? What capabilities are you designing? How do we create a modeling and simulation solution to help incorporate in those command posts or anything else of how do we do these operations? But what do you have to defend against? Because I have the commander say, great, Chad, I understand it, but what do I got to defend it against? Or what capabilities are out there that will help me reach my end state? And say, hey, we need a playbook, because being a sports person myself, it's just like, hey, there's playbooks for football, there's playbooks for baseball, there's playbooks for a lot of sports. I don't know if that's a thing that officers like using sports analogies, but it is what it is. So that's the problem. It's a very colorful eye chart on the left there, but that's really the areas that we're looking at, and there's a lot of overlap. Because you're dealing with signal intelligence, that's SIGINT, but you're also dealing with electronic warfare there on the left, and then cyber on, offensive cyber or cyber operations on the right. And there's a lot of overlap. Because my old boss used to tell me, Lieutenant General Fogarty, he says, the network and our data is our foundational weapon system. So as a foundational weapon system, how do you train on it? How do you employ it? And how do you manage it in a contested environment? Because, trust me, China has some very exquisite capabilities that are designed solely to deny us the use of the network. And without the network, we don't have a joint fight. We don't have multi-domain operations. We can't talk to our partners and allies. Look at what's happening in Ukraine. It's trench warfare. It's like, a lot of the network has been denied them. So now they're going back to people running messages, more motorcycles running messages. So we got messengers moving it, because as soon as you emit something on the electromagnetic spectrum, you're being targeted. I think it's a 3-minute scoot or 8-minute scoot. That's what the electronic warfare guys got, the 8-minute scoot. Once you tog something, you got 8 minutes before incoming artillery is going to hit your position. So how do we tell the commanders and staff the story? How do we give them something easily digestible so they can actually utilize it in a training percentage? Because now you go to these combat training centers like NTC or CMTC, and they're like, hey, we're going to use electromagnetic operations, electronic warfare, or cyber operations, and quickly the unit cannot understand it because they have not trained on their network or those capabilities at home station. So that's what we're looking at. You got cyber for cyber, which is really the cyber mission force under Cyber Command. But then the cyber for others is everybody else. It doesn't have to be high fidelity, it can be low fidelity. that really it is, what is the effects on the network? If I walk into a command post, a tactical operations center, and I see my screens and they go blue, the blue screens of death, the commander's like, well, am I under a cyber attack? Is somebody jamming one of my nodes? Or did this private bases kick out the power plug in the server stack in the back? What are you going to do? How did you train on that? How did you create those CTPs, these tactics, techniques, and procedures to go through those? So this is who we really made it for, is those commanders and staffs. How do they understand that complex environment that's going to happen in the future? A lot of us being popped out in Ukraine, that combat area is always accelerating and utilizing new technology. We're looking at cyber attacks are happening, but really what are the electronic warfare options and attacks are going on in that environment? So really it's like, how do we prepare those individuals? How do we give them a tool? They say, hey, I want to do a denial of service attack, a distributed denial of service attack, DDoS. Most people don't know what it is. So how do I have that happen at a command post? Well, this is what we did with this playbook. Okay, you want to have this effect. Okay, now these are the capabilities, these are the simulations that are already in inventory or already being developed, and this is how to utilize them. So for that technical part, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Cox so he can talk in more details on that.
Thank you, Colonel Dr. Bates from Army War College. So as Colonel Bates was discussing, the target audience for the SEMA playbook is really our users who fall into that SEMA for Others category. And that is your commanders and staff and the operational units, your support units to Army Cyber Command, and also your capability developers, your modeling simulation developers, and even your training personnel. And what we found in the search that we've conducted is that especially looking at sources like the Army Cyber Capability, Cyber Capability-Based Assessment from 2010, where they identified several requirements or gaps in the Army services, which included situational awareness, and 13 years later, that is still a requirement that we're striving to achieve. The other source we looked at was the Electronic Warfare Cyber Convergence Working Group in 2019, and then we've also had numerous discussions with AMSO, or the Army Modeling Simulation Office, and other sources. And what we found is that senior leaders lack the insight into the capabilities and vulnerabilities of their systems, but also how they employ those in multi-domain operations. And so even if you go to a mission training center, if they have, likely they don't have the capability to create a contested and congested environment for those commanders to power through. But even if they do, a lot of times they have to turn those capabilities off just so that the commander can get to their training objectives. So and as a result of that, a lot of times you have a lot of senior leaders who are running around who don't fully understand the impact of cyber, electronic warfare, and information operations to their mission. So with that in mind, we came up with the SEMA playbook, which focuses on a lot of basically cyber or SEMA-induced or SEMA-based plays that with SEMA implications, I should say, so that they can see how these plays can actually support their mission and training objectives. And the other thing that we found is that the senior leaders themselves, they're not alone. In a recent research article from the Cyber Defense Review, we found that, and that was conducted by Pike, Ness, and Felter, and they came up with the Problem Anticipation Task Assessment. And what they did was, using that assessment, they found that even though they were working with digital natives and United States Military Academy cadets, that 39% of their research participants failed to come up with a single cyber threat, even though when they looked at the scenario that was given to them, it included things like that you might expect cyber attacks to be targeted against. For instance, in the attack, they had radios, biosensors, position navigation timing, drones, cell phones, satellites, and networks were all thrown in. So with that in mind, going back to what our work focuses on, we're looking at those use cases with SEMA-related implications for tactical commanders. And the value that we think the playbook is going to bring to those commanders is, one, helping them to understand the system capabilities, or their system's capabilities, and how to best employ those, but also enhanced requirements for modeling and simulation developers. There's also going to be the support for commanders' training objectives during exercises, and help them to come up with synergies to achieve overmatch against their adversaries. And then finally, to keep them aware that they're in this never-ending game of cat and mouse. And so to get us there, we came up with these graphical depictions of where you might find SEMA capabilities. And we have these defensive and offensive plays. And in the paper, we discussed 3 of these depictions, which is the electromagnetic spectrum, or EMS footprint, the information operations I/O for media, and then also key terrain cyber, or your mission critical systems. And then other depictions that you find in the playbook itself includes the mission systems. It's going to include networks and other systems there, and other depictions. Now, in this particular graphic, which is focused on EMS and footprint, what I'd like to highlight is, we're assuming that the opposing forces, they're always detecting, locating, IDing, and targeting each other in the battlefield. And once they do that, they're going to move into either fires and effects against their opponent, or they're going to look to do collection with signals intelligence or electronic intelligence. They might decide to move forward with jamming or spoofing for position, navigation, and timing devices. And somehow they're probably going to look to work in, like, how do I coordinate that in with maneuvers or fires in order to maximize the impact that I might have against my adversary. Now, on the defensive side, we're looking at things like, cell phone control. What we found in the Ukraine conflict is that both sides have been fairly successful in targeting one another based on a cluster of cell phones appearing in a interesting area, or a soldier picking up a compromised cell phone from a local. And because of that, they're giving away coordinates that they might not otherwise make available to the adversary, and next thing you know, fire or shells are raining down on them. Now, the other thing we have to consider, though, is that's cell phones, but then there's this net control plan. So we can't, and for command and control, so we can't just go running into a battle with a near-peer adversary, broadcasting the way we normally would with high power, trying to get as much communication as we can. We have to be strategic. So we have to start thinking about, is there going to be a time where we're going to go radio silent, or is there windows of opportunity when we're going to decide to communicate? Because when we start thinking about those things, we also have to start thinking about, what about my terrain awareness? Are there obstacles that's going to help to obfuscate my signal so it makes it harder to target me? Can I deploy deception so that when I am communicating, I can at least confuse the adversary to help make it look like I might be in multiple locations so they can't just fire immediately on me? Mobility is also a big factor. As Colonel Bates just said, we might be looking at 8 minutes from the time we broadcast to the time shells come down. It could get faster as technologies get better. And so as a result of that, we can't roll in and set up these big command operating posts and sit there and think that we're not going to ever have to move. We're going to have to be very mobile, especially if we think we're going to broadcast in this type of environment. And then there's technologies like beamforming, where I can use those to minimize my footprint so that it's not easy to detect me from certain angles, and I can still use lower power to communicate with my sister units. And then, of course, if I do find myself in a situation where I'm being jammed, what is my PACE plan, or what is my primary alternate contingency and emergency communication plan for how am I going to work through that to basically maintain command control and keep the mission moving forward? So, moving on to there's other depictions that we actually have in the playbook, and this one basically shows the action-reaction counteraction approach that we offer in the playbook. And what this does is, and I'll go over this in the next 2 slides, but the idea is that we actually give commanders plays where they start thinking about, how do I employ my SEMA assets in a way that is going to allow me to achieve an objective? And in this case, you see that we have a deception phase and a targeting attack phase. And I'll go ahead and walk through those phases now. So in the first phase, you have the blue request information operations support. And they might do that through their expeditionary SEMA team. And in a lot of cases, it's kind of like who you know and do you know the right people to reach out to. So in this case, the unit reaches out to their ECT, or their expeditionary SEMA team, and they request information operations support. What we want to do is start deceiving our opponent or our adversary into thinking that we're in a location where we're not. They send this up to Army Cyber and U.S. Cyber Command, And maybe that generates some information operations. Maybe we feed information into social media. But then we want to further sell that by having our electronic support teams move out to a location and try to simulate some signals that would be implicative of a brigade or a battalion or whatever unit it is that we're trying to get to draw fires. And so as we progress here, the adversary is receiving the social media. They're starting to scan, and they're seeing a signal that could be the blue force. And at the same time, we're trying to use operational security where we're at to kind of keep ourselves quiet so that they're not aware of us in our current location. So as we move forward, we see that there's some communication that occurs between the scanning points with the command and control node, and then we see some communication with the fires, and that helps us to trigger those down. So the next phase we move into is the actual targeting, and with the targeting, we actually jam. Since we've identified their location, we've identified them. We can jam that area, and then we can fire on them to maximize the effect. So the other plays that you might find in here are the movement to contact with SEMA and SEMA-focused movement to contact. Those are very one of those is kind of granular. One's more for a operational scale. We have military deception and sensor to shooter. And then the capabilities that we explore include jamming, denial of service. And as you go through the paper, what you'll find is we try to coordinate jamming with electronic warfare, targeting with cyber and EW, how we could use those in conjunction, and then also that fake news and propaganda to support our I/O. And then also in the content, the playbook includes projections and context for the Army 2028 and the Army SEMA. So the things that we really want the user to take away from this is that cyber operations require long planning cycles, and as they're working through the playbook, they'll start to understand that I need to I need to start thinking about cyber operations well in advance of the attack. So we want to use that in the beginning stages of the conflict. However, EW, what we find with that is it's probably best used with maneuver fires and other warfighting functions to expand that fog of war. And then as we're also working through the playbook, we're hoping that commanders are going to start to better visualize domain connections, and with more options, they're going to start growing comfortable with throwing more audibles out there as far as how they're going to use their resources. And then moving on to just the final part of this is, we realize that the work we've done so far is not complete. We would still like to add additional plays that addresses electronic protection and additional aspects of the SEMA environment. But then also we would like to work with the electronic warfare data exchange model working group so that we can better align the playbook with modeling simulation efforts that are coming. And then finally, future work is going to include things like, could we take the SEMA playbook and work with the researchers who came up with the problem anticipation task assessment and see if we can improve that score based on they receive the assessment, they complete the SEMA, they do the assessment again, and do we actually see any changes? Like, are they actually starting to think about how SEMA impacts their operations? And with that, I will go ahead and conclude and leave the floor open for questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation. The floor is open for questions.
Yes.
No, because EWPMT is the new change to it. It will be integrated into it, but it's more or less is what are other people already doing? Because everybody had cyber in their budget or EW in their budget, so there's a lot of stovepipes out there, and that's why the initial up there, the initial thing of all these different groups. So a lot of different groups are working a lot on the same topic. This is now how do we bring all that work together? But EWPMT and the other IEW-TPT, which will be the simulator to that, will be integrated. But it's that was the focus of that was different than trying to create simulation for it. It was more the management tool, EW program management tool.
And one of the things we saw the playbook contributing to is helping to come up with those scenarios where you might use EWPMT in a training environment, not necessarily feeding directly into EWPMT. Yes?
Is there any, you
there has been analysis on it, goes back as being a modeling simulation guy, it's like, oh, simulation's down. But if the intelligence officer does their due diligence, and they say, here is the threat, here is the cyber threat, and this is what you need to worry about, or these are kind of the attacks, then that conversation is different. Then the commanders have an understanding of, oh, it's not the simulation, there aren't the other attacks. And then, you have to coach them and everything else, but that's part of it. It's like, if the intelligence is out there, if it is in the intelligence brief or the simulation or the exercise that's being done, then they know that there is gonna be a threat. And then they can say, well, what's happening? It's like, well, but it's also an education and a training problem of how do we do that at home station training? So they can go through that, they can create these TTPs, and they can go through that mental process.
Is there an authoritative data set somewhere that has history, you could say,
No,
cyber attack, okay, simple answer.
We have some attempts at it. So there is the cyber data exchange model. There's electronic warfare data exchange model that's just currently being developed right now. Dr. Catherine Morse is working on that. We've been working with her trying to figure out how we're going to enumerate a lot of that data.
That's modeling, and I'm more concerned, like, so where do we get the data that's going to
yeah,
fill that model?
actually, Army G2 is just putting together that. Randy Nunes, is Randy here? But yeah, so he is kind of leading that for Army G2, specifically looking at what are the threats, what are the capabilities that they have, enumerating a little more. But, there's right now, we don't have a threat book of all the threats out there, and especially cyber is an ever-evolving battlefield. It's really hard to collect something and normalize it and to try to put it in something because there's something new coming out next week.
Yeah, because we're used to PHPK tables for fires, but how do we come up with the, probability to intercept, probability to jam, probability to defend against some sort of a mission or some sort of internal cyber attack?
But for the electronic warfare type stuff, it's like, a lot of lessons learned from Ukraine, and that's why we got the 8-minute shoot and scoop type thing, because that's how quickly Russian artillery is responding to this kind of, with the proper electronic sensing equipment that they're tied to. Come on, any more questions? How do we get questions?
All right. Thank you.